All right, so this will probably be the last video we do on the OGL. We've done I think 2 videos so far on the OGL, and I think this will be the last one that we watch. I just really like this creator. So yeah, let's watch this video on this guy, and then we'll figure things out afterwards.
The Wizards of the Coast situation is far from over, ladies and gentlemen. The entire tabletop and Dungeons and Dragons community has been speaking out against the company that's tried to nuke the open game license that has paved the road to a flourishing community thanks to custom-made third-party content that has kept.
I feel like a company that does this truly does not understand how their social presence is, or how their reputation matters. Like the reputation management team for Wizards of the Coast is really bad. Like really bad.
Dungeons and Dragons and all the tabletop activity surrounding it just fresh and vibrant. And it's not just community members who've been speaking out, though. Employees within Wizards of the Coast disagree with leadership's decisions and their shenanigans, and so they've been speaking to the press. They've been leaking material that further highlights the nefarious schemes behind the scenes. And I'm going to talk about more developments on that front. But before we do so, I want to remind you guys that I did make 2 videos on this already, one of them titled Wizards of the Coast Piss Off D&D Community with Awful, Restrictive, and Greedy New OGL 1.1 that focuses on the investigative report by Linda Codega. This is the article in question. This is the article, the investigative report that kickstarted all of this, exposing the planned OGL 1.1, the updated version that isn't such an open game license. And then beyond that, you've got the follow-up video, D&D Community's Revolt of New OGL intensifies. Wizards of the Coast respond with duplicitous statement that covers Wizards of the Coast responds that looks something.
So there's basically a war going on in Wizards of the Coast. And for people who aren't aware, basically people who work there have been leaking things nonstop because there's people who work there who really, really love the game and don't agree with what the CAOs are doing. And that's why we're getting so much information so many days in a row. We get something new just about every day, it feels. And that's why there's so many people making videos on the topic. And that's why there's so much flood right now of OGL related D&D content.
Like this, an update on the open game license that came after the backlash intensified. Ever since Linda's report, we've been seeing campaigns like this, hashtag OpenDND, which essentially summarizes the nefarious ways in which the OGL is being updated, how all this is going to restrict work and give Wizards of the Coast legal rights to reproduce and resell creators' content, so on and so forth. It aims to restrict anything that isn't printed media or PDF, so videos, virtual tabletop environments, and campaigns, computer games, novels, apps, graphics novels, music, songs, dances, pantomimes, royalties. They wanted to implement basically any revenue you earn above $750,000.
The only reason I think that a company would do this is they think that the people who play their game are literally so stupid that they wouldn't read the terms and conditions to a contract that has to do with their livelihood. They literally just assumed that no one would read it. There's no other explanation for what's going on right now.
Dollars, you have to give 25%.
Activision, yeah, pretty much. It's pretty close.
To Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast also stipulated in the new OGL that they can modify or terminate the agreement at any time, pull the rug from under the community, as they have done by trying to sneak OGL 1.1 into the D&D landscape. And Wizards of the Coast also stipulated in that OGL that they can use any content created under the new OGL however they please. They can take that content and essentially profit off of it without having to compensate the original creators, and basically they retain all rights to everything is what they said, which is why we've seen third-party publishers speak out from Hound
The general belief is that the subreddit is that the new CEO of Hasbro is trying to run Wizards of the Coast like a video game company when that is not how role playing games work. I mean, I think that is how role playing games work. It's just not how TTRPGs work.
Song Games to White Hack RPG to Cobalt Press to MCDM to Paizo, the creators of Pathfinder, among many others. They all basically spoke out saying if this is the course that Wizards of the Coast wants to take, then we're going to abandon the D&D 5th edition system and OGL, and we're going to use our own open system and ensure that those systems remain open for anyone to partake in. Content creators like myself and Most Critical, Asmongold, Legal, Stephanie Sterling, and other prominent figures like Neil Gaiman, Cory Doctorow, tabletop RPG YouTubers and streamers like D&D Shorts, Ginny D, and Critical Role in a more sort of restricted way because Critical Role has contractual obligations with Wizards, so they had to put out a more vague and more low-key statement, but still in support of the community at large. All of them came out and essentially spoke out and had their own thing to say. And journalists and content creators alike would receive leaks from employees from within Wizards of the Coast. One employee leak in particular stated how higher-ups within Wizards of the Coast essentially see the community as obstacles to their money, and they specified that D&D Beyond numbers is what they're basing their decisions on.
Yeah, and we've heard this all before, right? We pretty much every video we've watched has pretty much been like, yeah, cancel your D&D Beyond subscriptions. I don't think anyone in the chat is subscribed to D&D Beyond. I was. I no longer am. So if you are subscribed to D&D Beyond, please cancel your subs.
D&D Beyond being a subscription service that allows people to access apps and digital materials when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, that just makes it really convenient to play the game, which is why suddenly a campaign kickstarted called D&D Be Gone that encouraged people to unsubscribe.
It's probably far more than 60K at this point, but yes. As soon as this was going on and as soon as people heard that they were looking at D&D Beyond subscriptions as a metric, people dropped in troves. I mean, it was hashtagging. It was probably 3.4 million on trending, which is insane, by the way. If you don't know how Twitter trends work, it was like 3.4 million trending on Twitter. So I would be surprised. The only thing I can assume is that maybe some people are partnered with D&D Beyond and they can't unsub. Maybe those people are still subbed, but otherwise people are unsubbed like crazy. I can't imagine anyone staying unless they're literally making money and they cannot unsub because of that reason.
So they can send Wizards of the Coast a message that they'll actually listen to, because at the end of the day, these higher-ups, these executives, these corporations, the thing that they'll listen to most is their financial bottom line. And if as a community we can affect that, then they'll be forced to actually backpedal on some really crappy decisions, which is exactly what we saw happen with this update on the open game license. This was published 3 days ago by...
I also most of this news is not super important. What's really going to be important is seeing how Critical Role and the people from that respond over time. If this goes through, figuring out whether or not Matt Mercer and his team are going to stay with D&D Beyond is probably the biggest thing. Because if they don't, Wizards of the Coast are fucked. Because right now, Critical Role is the biggest Twitch channel on Twitch. It is the biggest TTRPG content creation group ever made, probably. If they break off from Wizards of the Coast and D&D Beyond because of really bad practices, then it spells doom for them. So everyone's kind of really waiting for an official statement beyond what they've already given out. The statement they've given out has been very It's been very I'm contractually obligated not to give a statement, so it's not a real statement. It's like an okay statement. They can't say much right now because they're under contract, but we'll see how things progress over time.
By Wizards of the Coast, and they essentially apologized and said, we're listening to feedback, we're going to backpedal on a couple things, and we promise you that it was always our intention to take your feedback before making our new OGL official, which is 100% a bull-faced lie, complete bullshit. They claimed in this apology letter that the new OGL was all about fending off hateful or discriminatory products and fighting back against Web3, blockchain, and NFTs. But nobody's buying into that. This is very much a cover story to try to say
We said this yesterday too. Saying you're trying to combat discriminatory statements or discrimination is too blanket of a statement to put into a public distribution. If you say that, we don't really know what constitutes discriminatory, and that can be used as a weapon in any regard. With any whim, there needs to be more concrete like walls around that to know exactly what discriminatory means, and there wasn't in that statement, which made it even worse, to be honest.
face on what their larger goal was, which was to exert control over D&D community content in order to be able to further their corporate interests to the max. Without the open game license, people wouldn't be encouraged to engage with tabletop and Dungeons and Dragons and make content for this system on the level that they have. And now that Wizards of the Coast is seeing such great results from what the community has built, now they want to swoop in and take it all for themselves. It's utterly egregious. In this response letter, Wizards of the Coast backpedaled when it comes to restrictions on educational/charitable campaigns, live streams, cosplay, virtual tabletop. They said they're going to go easier on, and quote-unquote, etc. So that's really vague. We're going to have to wait until the final OGL is released to really gauge what they're backpedaling on and what's sort of more duplicitous wording. They also backed off on royalties and the initial intention to take 25% of everything that was earned past the $750,000 mark for any endeavor, and that's revenue, not profit, which is an important distinction. And they backed off on the language within the new OGL that stipulated that Wizards of the Coast has the right to use third-party content, community content, however they wish, that they own the license to all of that, and that they can do whatever they want with that profit off of it if they wanted to without having to compensate or credit the original creators. But this very much feels like a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back maneuver. They still took that 1 step forward. They're still trying to push for things that shouldn't be. And what especially reveals the duplicitous and manipulative nature of this response that tries to paint the picture that Wizards of the Coast had the best of intentions and that they always were going to listen to community feedback is this bit right here. You're going to hear people say that they won and we lost because making your voices heard forced us to change our plans. Those people will only be half right. They won, and so did we. They actually felt the need to come out and say, you didn't own us, you didn't control us or force our hand on anything. We are in it together with you guys.
I want to bring attention to all that line. We talked about this yesterday with people who weren't here. Those people will only be half right. They won, and so did we. Is, like I said before, the line a villain uses before they exit the room. Like, this is literally like you're in a TTRPG D&D session with your DM and the bad guy gets away, and this is what he says before he leaves the room. This is literally that.
And so did we. They actually felt the need to come out and say, you didn't own us, you didn't control us or force our hand on anything. We are in it together with you guys. Let's all hold hands and celebrate in our collective victory. No, this is the community's victory, not the executives and higher-ups at Wizards. It was never their intention to take community feedback that seriously. The only reason they're doing it now is because the D&D Be Gone campaign proved to be so effective. Right here was reported by Linda Codega that Wizards of the Coast canceled the OGL announcement after online ire, and this was something that insider sources at Wizards of the Coast told IO9 about, further suggesting that employees within Wizards of the Coast are not happy with leadership decisions that, by the way, staff were not informed about until the very last minute, so they were also thrown off by all this and had the rug pulled from under them and are trying to deal with all of this. Even employees and staff at Wizards of the Coast have had enough, and that's why we're seeing them speak out even more. Just 2 days ago, on January 14th, 2023, Linda reported on more information that they obtained from employees at Wizards of the Coast. I was able to speak to former and current Wizards of the Coast employees for this latest piece, and the situation inside the Seattle stronghold is dire. Here's a report on some of what happened in between the OGL 1.1 leak on January 5th and the apology yesterday, and they provided further summary down here below. Scrolling down, you'll find essentially the abridged version of this story. Long story short, nobody in Wizards of the Coast planned for the OGL 1.1 to be widely seen before IO9 reported on it. Linda literally gave the community enough heads up so they can protest and revolt and provide the backlash needed, and the unsubscriptions from D&D
like the
Beyond
best,
needed for Wizards of the Coast to
the
change
best
their
leaker there has ever been.
Before they released the
The
final
person
version
from
of this updated
Wizards of the
OGL
Coast
that
who
would
leaked
seek
it
to
is a
restrict the
legend.
openness of the old OGL. The D&D and tabletop community definitely owe Linda a lot. Amazing job by Linda for reporting on this and getting the story out there before Wizards could realize their master plans. We confirmed the rumored sweetheart deals that Wizards of the Coast presented to third-party publishers in late December, and how the fan-led D&D Begone campaign sent the biggest message. Wizards of the Coast plan was to keep the new OGL under wraps, and only a handful of third-party publishers were made privy to the updated OGL, and these hand-picked third-party publishers were the ones who were offered these sweetheart deals that are better than what's conveyed in the OGL, the updated OGL. But outside of that hand-picked circle, the plan was to just dump the new OGL on the entire community without notice and just ride out the backlash. Linda further continues from information obtained from staff and employees within Wizards of the Coast. There was an OGL 2.0 that was supposed to release Thursday alongside an FAQ. The 2.0 would go into effect Friday referring to the 13th of January, so a couple days ago. We saw the FAQ ahead of time. It was a half step back from 1.1, the backpedaling that occurred after the backlash. When the FAQ began to spread, Wizards of the Coast buttoned up in order to avoid more leaks to press and content creators. The apology update was very likely written Thursday afternoon, so January 12th, just a couple days ago, after the 12 o'clock Pacific time release of the FAQ 2.0 was canceled. I did not receive a copy of that blog or any indication it would happen ahead of time. This was a surprise response to try to take narrative control back, an attempt that failed utterly miserably. Everyone can see through the utter bullshit that reeks through this apology statement.
The thing is, too, like I said before, they think you're stupid. They think the entire D&D community is stupid, and that they won't read the fucking rules and read between the lines, which is hilarious.
Just pathetically desperate attempts at trying to save face. About as desperate as EA trying to frame psychologically and financially harmful loot boxes as being akin to Kinder Eggs, being quite fun and quite ethical. There are surprise mechanics. It's that level of you really think people are that stupid to buy into such obvious, blatant bullshit. Linda also makes it a point to highlight that the PR spin from Wizards of the Coast brass in their update is
Wait, was this all leaked by Linda Codega? Was the original leaker Linda? Can anyone clarify? She's a legend if that's the case.
Transparent, and nobody is taking them at face value. Even optimists are waiting to see the updated OGL. In 7 days, Wizards of the Coast has destroyed the 5th edition community it enjoyed for nearly 10 years. They are on their back foot. They did not win. This was not the plan, despite what Wizards of the Coast will have you believe by saying that forcing us to change our plans, that wasn't a win for the community. It was a win for all of us included. We did not get owned or wrecked. We did not submit to anything. We did not bow down to you. No. We are part of this shared victory because now we can move forward together. Yeah, cut the crap, Wizards of the Coast. Or as Linda put it,
Linda is a reporter who got anonymous tips from the inside. Okay, gotcha.
do not let yourself charitably imagine for a single moment that this is anything other than a dozen suits whispering, "We're not owned," to themselves in fancy schmancy boardrooms, trying to soothe their own shattered egos after the community show them that they're the ones in power, not the corporations. When the community comes together and decides to take power away from the corporations, oh, that's when corporations approaching their community in bad faith really show their true pathetic colors. Linda continues, another thing to note, this isn't about money. It's clear that by dismissing royalties in the update that cash was just the cherry on top. This was and always will be about controlling the value of their IP, their image, and the cultural currency of Dungeons and Dragons. Could not have put it better myself. And then she proceeds to thank the staff members at Wizards of the Coast who risked their jobs to protest and revolt, to get this information out there, to keep the community informed, and to allow journalists like Linda to do the kind of reporting that has tangible impact. Ultimately, if it wasn't for the Wizards of the Coast staff stepping up and doing what they felt was right, because they're the ones who genuinely love the community and not the higher-ups and the executives who only care about keeping investors happy, we wouldn't be getting this report from Linda, and we wouldn't have been able to get ahead of Wizards of the Coast on this front. We wouldn't have been able to achieve what so far has been a victory for the community and for the community alone. Wizards executives, you are no part of this victory. You have lost. You tried to scheme. You tried to pull on over the community, and you failed. And even if you do succeed,
They haven't lost yet, dude. Gotta keep going.
and pulling one over the community, guess what? The community is just going to jump ship. They're going to kickstart their own open licenses and systems, and you're going to be left with very little. What the community built for you, Wizards of the Coast, they can also take away if they collectively decide to do so. And that's kind of what's been going on. Diving into the article itself, I want to highlight some specific quotes and specific details that Linda's tweet didn't go over. It is emphasized again that this comes from multiple sources from within Wizards of the Coast. You have my and the tabletop community's deepest respects, Wizards of the Coast staff and employees who put their livelihoods on the line to do the right thing. And what IO9 sources emphasize is that Hasbro's concern, Hasbro being the parent company of Wizards of the Coast, is less about public image and more about the IP hoard the dragon sits on, which corroborates this leak that D&D Shorts shared. This is a message that this Twitter user received from an employee within Wizards of the Coast who decided to speak out. In this message, the whistleblower emphasized that their communication
If you also aren't aware of who D&D Shorts are, they're a really big content creator on YouTube, and they have been working with members who work at the D&D Beyond and Wizard of the Coast to leak more information. So that creator is really awesome. I actually like him a lot. If you want to go watch his content, he's got a lot of good information and stuff. So if you're interested in D&D at all, go check out D&D Shorts.
the higher-ups communication gives me the impression they see customers as obstacles between them and their money, communications that have been going on within the company that employees have been privy to. And it was because of the immediate financial consequences that happened because of that mass campaign to unsubscribe from D&D Beyond that Wizards of the Coast leadership decided to take a step back, decided to delay the release of the open gaming license. This is a result of there being a provable impact on their bottom line. This is the only language corporations speak, ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line. There have been campaigns where there's been a lot of backlash, but people kept buying the products, and the bottom line wasn't affected negatively enough for the corporation to feel like their hand was being forced. But in this case, the backlash was followed up by action from the community that did impact their financial standing. That's the only language corporations will listen to. Affect the results that they'll have to show to their true customers, the investors, and suddenly they'll realize that the cattle that they're attempting to milk are human beings who are intelligent, who will fight back when certain lines are crossed, and who do understand that they are, in fact, in power. Now, even with all of this backlash and all of this community dissent and disapproval, Wizards of the Coast management has shown zero empathy, and instead, the messaging within the company has been that fans are overreacting to the leaked draft, and that in a few months, nobody will remember the uproar. That's what Wizards of the Coast management believes. And this is indeed how corporations tend to treat mass backlash from a community. They just kind of ride out the wave of backlash.
It's the correct thing to do. Like, it's not the morally correct thing to do, but that's what you should do as a company for the most part. If you make a bad choice, or if you're making a decision that is stakeholder positive but community negative, you do not react. You do not respond, and you let the rage go out, and you let it go until it dies. And it's up to people to continue that fight and continue that uh, consistent knowledge and attention to the subject, because it's a war of attrition in time. You don't want them to slip it out while you're not prepared and while you're not protesting. and they will wait. The good ones will, like like Blizzard and them. They'll wait out all those. They'll wait out all the boycotts, and it's the correct thing to do. And from their standpoint, to get what they want is to not react, because when they react and they respond, it gets worse. Like with the last response they had, like it just made it worse. You can't do that. The only choice you have from a PR standpoint is to stop and let it ride, or to concede and say, no, you guys are right. We're bad. Are sorry. We didn't mean it like that. We understand the connotations. We're going to stop doing what we're doing. And those are the only two options you really have as a company.
Just kind of hunker down. And unfortunately, more often than not, that works. But I don't know. For me, at least, based on what I'm seeing and the information that I've been reporting on, this situation seems different. This feels like backlash that will have enough of an impact that Wizards cannot just kind of coast by and say it'll blow over. From there, the article highlights even more licensees and third-party publishers who have been pushing back on top of Kobold Press and MCDM, Mont Cook Games, smaller indie presses, Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, Paizo, the owners of Pathfinder, I've already talked about them, Chaosium, and Legendary Games, among many others, have expressed their desire to break away from Dungeons and Dragons as long as Wizards of the Coast continues with this attitude. And even if they decide to fully backtrack on all of this, you know, there are questions as to whether we can trust Wizards of the Coast to not try to pull something similar in the future. Should we be this heavily invested in an ecosystem that can change on a whim, given Wizards of the Coast leadership's attitude and their lack of empathy or love for their own community? The current mass mindset is, why not divorce ourselves from all of this and just create our own open gaming licenses and systems that we will make sure remain open, because there is no greed behind it, but rather it's just the love of community creation. This article also has more details about these sweetheart deals from the third-party publishers that Wizards of the Coast handpicked to get a glimpse at the new OGL under likely some kind of NDA and whatnot, so it wouldn't get disclosed to the community, because again, the intention was never to get feedback from the community at large before making the new OGL official. An anonymous source who was in the room relayed that in late 2022, Wizards of the Coast gave a presentation to a group of about 20 third-party creators that outlined the new OGL 1.1. These creators were also offered deals that would supersede the publicly available OGL 1.1. Gizmodo has received a copy of the document called a term sheet that would be used to outline specific custom contracts within the OGL. The article further details how sweetheart deals would entitle signatories to lower royalty payments, 15% instead of 25% on excess revenue over $750,000, as stated in the OGL 1.1, and a commitment from Wizards of the Coast to market these third-party products on various D&D Beyond channels and platforms, except during blackout periods around Wizards of the Coast's own releases. It was expected that third parties would sign these term sheets, with an important caveat being, according to Noah Downs, a lawyer in the tabletop RPG space, that even though the sheets included language suggesting negotiation was possible to finagle certain aspects of the deal, he got the impression that there wasn't much room for change. Again, for Wizards, it's all about as much control as possible over their own IP and over their own brand. An IP and brand that wouldn't be as big as it is without that openness to freedom of creation. For some third-party publishers, their perspective is the damage is already done, and even if the new OGL completely walks back the most egregious changes, it might still not be worth sticking around. Here is David Markiski from Unseelie Studios, who said, even if Wizards of the Coast were to entirely walk the leaked OGL 1.1 back, it leaves such a sour taste in my mouth that I don't want to work with the OGL in the future. And then one last fun detail the article notes is specifics as to just how many people unsubscribed after the hashtag DND Begone campaign began to take hold across the internet and across the tabletop and D&D community. Sources from inside Wizards of the Coast confirm that earlier this week there were 5 digits worth of complaining tickets in the system. Both moderation and internal management of the issues have been a mess, they said, partially due to the fact that Wizards of the Coast has recently downsized the D&D Beyond support team. 5 digits worth of tickets, we're talking about tens of thousands of people, and people have to go through this support system where you have to submit a ticket in order to cancel your D&D Beyond account. So the majority of these likely were submitting a ticket to cancel their subscription, and I mean, tens of thousands of subscriptions worth of money, that does add up. We're still waiting on Wizards of the Coast to release the final version of the OGL. So even though they've made all these promises about ways that they're going to backpedal, we don't know for sure exactly how that's going to look like. The specific language is very important to analyze. So we'll wait and see what happens on that front. But I imagine that there are some egregious changes that the community would complain about where they're not going to budge on. And so I imagine that the new OGL is still going to be worse than what was the ideal OGL 1.0A. I just don't suspect that Wizards of the Coast will ultimately.
It's fucking depressing, dude. It's so depressing, honestly. I just got into D&D like this last year and a half. Like I just got into it in a real way, and now it's just all changing, and I'm probably gonna have to swap to another campaign setting, probably Pathfinder or something, and that's stressful because I just got done learning a lot about this system, so it's gonna be really hard to swap to a new one, but hopefully we can get through this pretty easily. Hopefully they just end up not making it a big issue, and they go back to the 1.0 setup, and that way, while it's not good to work underneath Wizards of the Coast, like at least you get to use the cool stuff that you know already, and you won't be affected. But
Do right by the community enough for them to be able to mitigate the damage that they've done to the community and just the mass exodus that's been occurring among third-party publishers to just partake in their own open license or to partake in their own system instead of having to worry about Wizards of the Coast trying to screw them over out of the blue and sneak stuff like a new OGL that's not so open. But only time will tell. Until then, this is the latest on this whole debacle. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on everything happening surrounding Wizards of the Coast and how you think the future will play out. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on YongYea.
I don't see it getting better. So, but yeah, like you said, let me know in the comments how you feel. But yeah, that was the video for the day. Give YongYea or YongYea a subscribe, follow if you haven't yet.